Hello and welcome to CPP. This is part 3 of the video series Introduction in GUI Programming with C++ and Qt5. Let's go ahead and open the project from last time. In this video we're gonna add a few features. Let's go ahead and do some small modifications to the UI. What we want to do is we will set maximum size for the buttons. This may be a little bit too small. Let's go ahead and add 50 there. Or you can, as usual, you can play with the numbers. It's not mandatory to use the exact same numbers that I use. Also, I want to get rid of the space in between the horizontal layout with the buttons and the splitter. Go ahead and use 0 for the main window layout spacing. Let's go ahead and set a window title. We want window title to be called notes. In the UI list of notes, we want to add a widget that's gonna be the visual representation for each node. Let's go ahead and add a new class. Let's call it node widget. We want it to inherit from QWidget. We want to add a parameter to the constructor, so we want a constant node reference node. We want a public member function that's going to return the node ID. We want another function that's going to update the content in the UI. So let's go ahead and code that too. Let's go ahead and add the forward references to the classes we will use. So a signal will be to remove the node. It's going to send the ID of the node as a parameter. And we're going to have a signal to rename node. It's going to send the ID as a parameter and const qstring reference new title. We want two protected functions. Basically, we will override some events. We want to override resize event. So Qt already offers the autocomplete for it. We don't need those two parentheses there. And we want to override context menu event. Same here. Now we want a few private functions. We want a function to actually set up the UI. In this class, as you probably seen already, we are not going to use a UI form, so we are going to code from scratch. I'm going to call this setup GUI, just so that you don't confuse it with the setup UI, which is the function that's generated. Basically, it does kind of the same thing as this one, but it is not the same thing. This is code that is generated from the UI file, and we won't have that in our widget. We want a function to update the labels, to update the text in the labels. We want a function to set elided text. We need a function to show the context menu. This function will take as a parameter a const qPoint, basically the coordinates where to show the context menu. And we need two functions for the functionality in the context menu. The handle for the remove action triggered. And we're gonna need the private member. We're gonna need two labels and some information about the node. We're gonna store the ID of the node as an int, and we're gonna store the title as a qstring, and the same the last modified. Also separately, we're gonna use a const qstring that will represent the date time format. So we want to represent the format, the date time, into a format on the widget. So let's go ahead and add that. So we want a day, month, year, minus hour, minutes, and seconds. Let's start implementing the functionality. We need to include a few headers. So in the constructor, we want to call our function setup GUI to basically initialize all the UI pointers, set our data members with the information from the node to string, and we want to use the date time format for the string. We call update labels, call set tooltip. We want a tooltip that's going to be on 2 rows, so we want to compose it and add a \n in between. So we want to provide 2 arguments. The first argument will be the title, and the second arg will be the last modified. This will just return the ID. For update content, we want to set the data members. For the resize event, we just call update labels, and then we call the default behavior of the QWidget. For the context menu event, we are gonna just call our own function that's create the menu and show it, and we want to set it the position from the event. We use the function global pose. We need to initialize our UI elements, to initialize the pointers, and we're gonna need to create a layout, and for that layout we're gonna add the 2 labels. So we need a layout. We want to add the labels to the layout. In the update labels, we want to set elided text on each of our labels. In the set elided text, we will need to know how long the text can be, and we need to trim it with elide right to that width, minus some small adjustment for the margins. We will get the parent, so we will call the parent function, which is a member of QObject and returns a QObject pointer. We cannot use directly the QObject pointer, so we will need to cast this into a QWidget. So we need to check first if the parent is set, if we have a parent. If we don't, there's nothing we should do, but that won't be the case. So now we need to convert that parent object into a QWidget. So we say it is parent widget. We use QObject cast. This works like dynamic cast from standard C++. Same like dynamic cast, this will return a null pointer. If parent object is not actually a QWidget, we need to check that. If parent widget, we move forward. Here we know that we have the parent, and our parent is a QWidget or a QWidget derived class. We don't care which QWidget derived class the parent is, because we only care that it's a QWidget and it has a width. And that's what we are interested in. Before we get the width, let's go ahead and initialize something called QFontMetrics. Let's call this FM. So we get the font from the label, and we initialize a class called QFontMetrics with whatever font it's used in the label. Now we need to obtain the elided text that's going to be set on the label. So we want font metrics, we want to get elided text from that. We will use the text, this is the whole text. We will use that as a parameter. We want cute elide right, and we want parent widget, we want to call width. And what we want to do in the end, we want to set the text on the label, the elided text. So basically we get the full text and we get the label. We obtain the parent widget. After that we create a font metrics with a font from the label. This is a class that knows how much space a font will need to render. We create an elided text, which is gonna be the parent width minus some margins. This is not really recommended to set magic numbers in the code like this, but I don't think it's worth it to go around and check the margins of everything. Now we need to set a Q menu. Let's call it context. First, let's go ahead and add another file to the resource. We're gonna need an icon for the rename functionality. So let's go ahead and click this and show in Finder. Go to the folder icons. I'm just gonna paste the icon here. You can go ahead and download it from the Google material or use whatever icon that you need. Now let's go ahead and go into the resource file. Let's open this with resource editor, add files. And we need to go to the items and we need to add rename.svg, the icon that I just pasted into that folder. Save the resource file, and then we can go here and copy the path. This is gonna be a QAction pointer, rename. We create another action by calling add action on a Q menu. Oh, this is not a pointer. Sorry about that. We want to set an icon. We need to create a Q icon, and for the Q icon we need to set the path from where we want to create a Q icon, and then we need to connect. Now let's go ahead and show the context menu. Call exec and we set as a parameter the position. For the remove, we only emit the remove node signal with the ID, and for the rename we will implement it a little bit later. Now let's go ahead to node list widget and do the modification there to show our widget. We're gonna need to set up node item. We don't want this anymore because we will create our own widget. First thing to do is we're gonna need to include check if we added the signals to the node list widget. No, we didn't. We're gonna need the node list widget to emit two signals for the remove node and for the rename node. Since we're only removing or renaming the current node, this is the parameter, the ID parameter is not really mandatory, but we were gonna send it anyway so that we will not have to get the current ID from the list widget all the time in main window when we'll handle this. This is gonna have another parameter. Here we will need to connect the widget signal remove node. What we are doing here is perfectly okay and valid. We're gonna connect a signal from the widget, from the node widget remove node, with another signal from node list widget. Basically, we just want to forward the signal. Whenever this widget is gonna emit the signal, we will forward it from node list widget. Why we do that is because we don't want to add dependencies in the main window to whatever item is showing into the nodes list. Main window will know just about nodes list, and whatever item is the node list decides to show here, it's its job. So we don't want to add dependencies. So we are doing this just to forward the signal from the node widget to the node list widget. Call the QListWidget to set the item widget. We want to set the item widget for the item, and that's the widget that we want to set. We will have to come back to this. I think this is gonna run. I think we've implemented everything. Let's see. This is running, but what do we see is we don't have the widget there. We don't see the widget. Basically, the problem is the QList widget doesn't reserve a bigger size for its widget. So we can see that the widget is there. We see the tooltip that we set. We see the context menu. We have a problem with our node icon, with our remove node icon. We have to fix that. The problem is that the QList widget doesn't set enough room for our bigger widget to display there. So to fix that, for the item, we need to set size hint of the widget. And now if we run again, you will see that now the widget appears. We're gonna need to do some small modifications. Basically, we don't set the ID of the node into the data in the item in the user role. What we do is set it into that widget. We need to get the item widget for the current item. To do that, we need to call item widget, and we want to pass the current item to it. We have a little bit of a problem. This returns is a QWidget. This doesn't have an get node ID. Whatever is returned by the item widget, we need to cast it into a node widget. What I'm gonna do here is not 100% safe in 100% of the times. It's only safe for us here because we are sure that every item widget will be a node widget. So if you're not sure, do not use static cast. In this situation, it is perfectly safe. But usually when you have this type of casts to do, it is safe to use a dynamic cast, or in the case of QObjects, you can use QObject cast. We are gonna do a static cast here. to a node widget pointer of whatever QWidget was returned by the item widget. And now we can use node ID. As I said, this is safe in our case now because whatever widget we set for the item, it's a node widget. If we would have used different widgets for different items, then this would not be safe and we would have to use dynamic cast here and test the pointer if the dynamic cast succeeded or not. On top of moving to the top, we need to update the widget. So again, we're gonna get a widget. We could have created a function to do this for us, but we are gonna call this only 2 times, so it doesn't matter as much. And then widget, update content, and we pass the node. Let's go ahead and add a new dialog for the rename dialog. New, we want Qt. We want Qt designer form class, dialog with buttons, dialog with buttons bottom, rename, maybe rename dialog. We want this to be a little bit smaller. It doesn't matter that the buttons are not showing for now. We want a label and the line edit. Let's name the line edit new name, line edit. Let's select this horizontal. Let's select the form vertical. Let's do it even a little bit smaller. Go ahead and save it and close it. Add a function we are gonna use to get the new name. New name edited, QString reference text. This is just gonna return the text. Let's go back to the UI a little bit. So this is a button box. You have button choices for the button box, and each of these choices is actually a Q push button. We're gonna need to get a pointer to the Q push button. Okay, I'm gonna just show you how to do that. Go ahead and close the UI. That button box is called button box, and from that we need to call the function button, and we're gonna need to pass an enum as a parameter. That enum is gonna be a QDialog button box. Okay, because the OK button is the button that interests us. Usually we would check if this button returns a not null pointer, but we know for sure that that is correct. So we want to set enabled on this button. If the text is not empty, we're gonna need to include a QPush button. Basically, if the user deletes the text, then the OK button will be disabled. What we need to do is in this class constructor, we're gonna get the old name and we're gonna set it in line edit. So let's go ahead and do that. Name line edit, set text, old name. We want to select the text, so we want the old text to be selected, so the user whenever open this dialog just start writing. And we want to call set selection, and we want to pass 0 as a parameter, and we want to pass the text size. We want to set the window title for this to be renamed. Let's go ahead and do that. One more thing that we want to do, we want to set a placeholder text for this line edit. So we want to go to the placeholder text. Let's go to the node widget, include the rename dialog. We want to create an instance of it. We want to pass in the title as the text, and we want to pass in this as a parent. We want to check if rename dialog.exec. Exec is the function that starts the main loop of the dialog and returns if the user accepted the dialog or rejected it. So if the user pressed OK or yes, or depending on which buttons do you select on the dialog to have. So we want to do QDialog accepted. So if the user accepts it, then we want to emit a rename node, the ID. We want to get a new node from the rename dialog, and we want to call new name for that. We have these two signals that we emit here connected to the signals in the node list widget. Now we need to go to the main window and connect the notes list widget signals to the main window, slots that will actually do the work. So let's check if we have the slots. We have the remove. Let's go ahead and add on rename. We want to call rename node with ID that we get and the new title. And then we want the notes list widget update current node. So we will let the nodes manager actually do the modification, and then after that we get the node and we pass it to the nodes list widget to update the current node. We want to connect the nodes list widget, remove node with this. And we're gonna need to provide an implementation into the nodes manager for the rename node. Search for the node. If the iterator return is different than nodes.end, we have the node within our collection. We use structured bindings again. And then we update the node title with a new title. And we set the last modified to be current date time. Go ahead and run it and see if it works. Oh yeah, we didn't fix. Let's go ahead and fix that too. It's actually delete, but we can go ahead and copy this, copy path, and we can just paste it. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead here. And we need to connect the text change signal. If we delete the text, the OK button will be disabled. That's all for this video. In the next one, we will save the notes into an XML file. As always, hope you learned something. See you in the next one. Bye bye.